On Saturday mornings at our house, it is not unusual to find the TV tuned to the Food Network for back-to-back episodes of The Pioneer Woman. This program features a woman who happens to be Presbyterian named Ree Drummond, who lives in Pawtuska, Oklahoma, on a cattle ranch that has been in her husband's family for several generations. In each episode, she prepares 3 or 4 dishes for her family while telling us about what's happening on the ranch. In the space of 30 minutes, we might see her make a chicken and pasta entree, a salad with homemade dressing, and whip up a special dessert while she chronicles ranch activities like cleaning out barns, replacing fence, and yes, rustling cattle. Her husband, her 4 children, and some of their ranch hands are featured in the program as the camera roams the ranch to illuminate their activities. And each episode ends with the family coming in to eat the meal that we've been helping the Pioneer Woman to prepare. Here's the thing. I've seen a lot of these, and they never, ever show the kids or anyone else wash their hands after they come in from the ranch to eat. Now, in my head, I know that this is editorial. There isn't enough time to show that, just like you can't show the 12 minutes it takes the pasta to boil or the cookies to bake. I also know in my head that it's really none of my concern whether people in Pawtuska, Oklahoma wash their hands before they eat. But it bugs me. So that's the first thing I thought of when I looked at the reading for today. Of course, these verses from the Gospel of Mark are not really about hygiene and germaphobes. They're about religious practice. But hand washing is something about which some of us are pretty religious. In these verses, the pious religious leaders are criticizing the followers of Jesus for their failure to observe the hand-washing ritual that is consistent with the practice of their faith. And in his famous response that there is nothing from outside a person that by going in can defile, Jesus seems to reference not just hand-washing, but all the dietary practices and rituals associated with devout and pious religious practice in first century Judaism. For us, it may call to mind all those kinds of religious practices of various religious traditions, hand-washing, fasting, the religious avoidance of certain foods. And to most of us as modern Protestants, those sorts of things seem odd, archaic, unnecessary, and, according to Jesus, hypocritical. We love to look down on the Pharisees. But I read it differently this time, not just because of the Pioneer Woman, but maybe because last month I had the very powerful experience of being part of an interfaith women's conversation about Ramadan, the Muslim month of religious fasting. And actually, before their prayers to break the fast, these women stepped away for religious washing. I have Jewish friends who keep kosher, you probably do too. I have Catholic friends who abstain from meat on Fridays during Lent. All of these are practices, dietary hand-washing practices for spiritual reasons. And a lot of these people, these Muslim women we sat with, these are people who have spiritual lives that I admire. So the condemnation that comes so easily in this text made me uncomfortable. We usually read this to say, thank God we're not Pharisees. And it just didn't seem enough. The tradition of fasting and religious rituals that involve washing go back thousands of years, spiritual disciplines with strong roots in the Bible. An Orthodox Christian once told me that the purpose of fasting during Lent is so that on Easter morning, even the tongue and the stomach might experience resurrection. Isn't that wonderful? The tradition of critiquing empty religious ritual also goes back a long way too and is evident in the prophets. Jesus quotes Isaiah. Even though our Protestant traditions are short on religious ritual, even though those fasting or hand-washing traditions seem strange to us, could there be more to this than just criticizing other people? You may know that Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It calls for every year for a month, faithful Muslims fasting from dawn until sundown, abstaining from food, drink, and sexual relation. And when Ramadan falls in the summer, as it did this year, that's about 15 hours without food or drink, including water. This year, during the season of Ramadan, there was an article in the Courier and Press, and quoting local restaurant owner Christy Manna, she said, "When you fast, you find how much you really need to sustain yourself. For the first few days of Ramadan," she said, "you get so hungry, you think you're going to eat the whole world when you break the fast. But after a little while, your stomach shrinks and you can't eat that much. It changes your perception of how much is enough," she said. It changes your perception of how much is enough. That stuck with me. And it certainly sounds like a pretty worthwhile spiritual exercise in our overeating consumer culture to check our perception of what is enough. It made me think not just that they aren't wrong, but that I could benefit from that kind of practice. So I'm not as comfortable with looking down on these spiritual practices and religious rituals that are so strange to us. But of course, is that the takeaway, that fasting's a bad thing? That being careful not to drink any water when you brush your teeth during Ramadan, or planning your Friday meals to include no meat, or eliminating all traces of leaven from your house during Passover, is it a bad thing? Is the conscious ritual washing of face, hands, feet in connection with prayer, is that a bad thing? Are these people self-deluded? Don't they understand grace? Are those of us in the worldwide religious minority who typically don't have these kinds of practices, are we the only ones who are getting it right? Well, of course we know the problem isn't your spiritual discipline, the problem isn't your religious ritual, the problem is spiritual and religious hypocrisy. The night we listened to the Muslim women talk about Ramadan, one of them said, "You've probably heard about Muslims who sleep all day during Ramadan so they can eat and drink all night." Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I have heard of that. That isn't fasting, she said. Sleeping is not keeping Ramadan. If you stay in bed for Ramadan, this does not make you a good Muslim. And then the other women went on to tell us that Ramadan requires abstaining not only from food and drink, but also from emotional outburst. An emotional outburst is breaking the fast just as much as eating a hamburger. One woman talked about her child seeing the telltale signs that Daddy was about to lose his temper and crying out, "Don't break your fast, Daddy!" In other words, for Muslims, if you keep the letter of the law by reversing your days and nights, you're not really embracing the discipline. And if you perfectly abstain from food and drink but act like a bear to those around you, well, religious hypocrisy is endemic. We tend to be experts on religious hypocrisy, everyone's except our own. In fact, our uncanny human ability to see anyone and everyone's hypocrisy except our own is a favorite theme with Jesus. Remember, this is the guy who famously counseled taking the log out of your own eye before you worry about the speck in your neighbor's. The Barna Group completed some well-publicized research about the unprecedented number of Americans who identify religiously as none of the above. The findings of the research and what to do about it are described in a book by Dave Kinnaman called Unchristian. Among American adults with no use for religion, 87% say one of the main reasons is because of hypocrisy, the hypocrisy of religious church-going people. Now, non-churchgoers have always said that, but this research has gained new traction because the scope is broader than it's been before. Unprecedented numbers of adults, especially those in their 20s and 30s, are identifying religiously as none of the above. The perception is that Christians say one thing, but live something entirely different. Kinnaman writes that those of us who are serious about our faith, who are serious about reaching people with our faith, need to strive for a new perception, one more like Christians are transparent about their flaws and act first, talk second. Transparency, act first, talk second. The lesson from James says religion that does not bridle the tongue but deceives the heart is worthless. Act first, talk second. Just as the church needs to listen to those who are opting out because of what they perceive as our hypocrisy, individually, we need to look to the hypocrisies in our own lives, which is so very hard to do. In a presentation earlier this month at the Global Leadership Summit, Sheila Heen from Harvard Law School and the Harvard Negotiation Project, the co-author of a book called Thanks for the Feedback, advised a large group of church leaders about being both authentic and effective, and said, you have to figure out how to identify your own personal blind spots. Her advice was, ask someone you trust, someone who knows you well and has your best interest at heart, to tell you what your blind spots are, because there's no other way to find out. That would take courage, wouldn't it? What a risk. To say to someone, I sincerely want to improve, I want to grow, I need to know what I'm missing, so give me the bad news. The Jesus movement emerged in a climate where religious leaders and established institutional religious communities couldn't see. They couldn't see their own personal and corporate hypocrisies and blind spots, and they didn't want to try. Jesus came onto the scene reaching out to those that established religion was missing. He came onto the scene bringing authenticity and a laser focus on God's boundless love for people in all their flaws and brokenness. That laser focus exposed and cut through blind spots and hypocrisy. We're in such an era again. In a recent issue of Relevant magazine, Pastor Stephen McAlpin writes about the authentic faith he believes his generation craves. He says, of all the things the millennial generation wants out of church, authenticity may be the most important. As a 20-something pastor, I see the need for authenticity in the hearts of my neighbors as well as in my own heart. It's the battle cry of our generation, often expressed publicly with ironic clothing and accessories, or more privately in heart-to-heart conversation. We're fed up with wearing masks and hiding the truth about ourselves in an effort to blend in, because it starves our hearts and leaves us empty. We crave a place and a people we can be our true selves with and be truly loved. We're crawling out from the bushes and searching for more. And we're calling out others to do the same, creating new standards for relationship. The hypocritical hiding of the truth about ourselves starves our hearts and leaves us empty. Isn't that what Jesus is talking about? Aren't we all just trying to hold it together and keep up appearances? And isn't it starving our hearts and leaving us empty? Pretense, hiding from the truth? As individuals, as churches, as a nation, don't we crave authenticity no matter our age or generation? Well, the authentic and life-changing love and mercy of God are right here. But they can't get in when we're all buttoned up in our goodness. Those most faithful and spiritual in their practice of fasting are starving their bodies to feed their hearts and souls. Those practicing hand washing and ritual purification for a deeper prayer life are seeking to wash away the pretense and the hypocrisy. Perhaps those from other traditions and those from no tradition are inviting us to confess our own starving hearts, our own emptiness that we paper over with our blind spots and hypocrisies, so that Jesus can get in, so that we can be healed. Perhaps we're being invited to take the risk to open ourselves to that authentic and transforming love that flows for hypocrites near and far, even the one in the mirror. Because that ancient wellspring of love and forgiveness, of hope and new possibility, flows to those who know they need it, filling the emptiness of pretense, healing the pain of imperfection, the disappointment we feel with ourselves and each other, and offering true and authentic new life. But in the words of that pastor, we have to crawl out from our bushes. Maybe I have to turn my attention from the hygiene of some kids on TV to the hygiene of my own spirit, from my faux superiority over somebody else's religion to look in the mirror, to see and hear and receive the one who calls me by name. Amen.